Hello everyone, it's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique and the Bead Mat. And today I'm going to teach you how to make this adorable earring. Here's what it looks like on the back. And here's what it looks like on the front. And the technique used is brick stitch around a frame. You're going to need 3 components for this project. One is going to be a round soldered closed hoop component. And this one on the outside diameter measures about 28 millimeters. And then the inside diameter is 25 millimeters. And this is a little frill, textured edge component that I got in a pack of many different kinds of components from Joann's. But you can use any type component here, as long as it's close to the same size for this design, so that the interior beads will fit nicely along the interior edge. You'll need two of those, 2 earring wires of your choice, and 2 4mm horseshoe wire protectors. You're going to need 3 kinds of beads. I'm using 11/0 delicas, and you should also use 11/0s if you want this pattern to work out properly. The ones I'm using are metallic galvanized silver delicas. You need some 15/0s, and I'm using the metallic hematite 15/0s by Toho. And you need 12 rondelles, and these are also metallic hematite. And these are 3 by 5 millimeters. Those tiny little small ones. You're going to need a beading needle, and I'm using a little bit of a bent one here, but this is a size 11 pony beading needle. And I'm using 6-pound fire line in the crystal clear. You do not need a stop bead, so go ahead and thread on about a wingspan of fire line onto your needle, and we'll get started. Here's a little tip for you guys. I bend my needles a lot, but I just take a pair of pliers and I straighten them back out a little bit. This project, you will wind up bending your needle a little bit, so be prepared for that. If yours is weak or broken, you may want to switch out for a new needle. So I've got my fire line threaded on, and the first thing I need to do is tie on to this hoop. So I'm simply going to run my fire line through the center, and I'm going to tie 2 overhand knots. Now cinch those up pretty tight up against my bead frame. Just like that. And that's what you should have. So now I'm ready to start. We're going to start with the beads on the outside of the bead frame here. And for those I used all 15/0s of the metallic hematite. And when you're doing brick stitch, on the beginning of every row, you start out with 2 beads. So pick up 2 of your 15/0 seed beads. We're going to let those fall down up against the bead frame, just like that. I'm going to move my tail thread out of my way a little bit here. So now here's my beads sitting down here by my bead frame. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to pass through the center of my frame from the back to the front. And I'm going to pull, and I'm going to use my finger to hold these beads up on the edge of the frame. Then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go through the second bead I picked up, which I'm left-handed, so I know that the second bead I picked up is over here on my left. So if you take your string out and look, and just poke it back through there a little bit so you can see better what I'm talking about. When I let these beads fall, the first one that hits the frame is the first bead I picked up. The second one I picked up is the one kind of on top. So now I've come through the hoop with my needle and thread. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go from the bottom to the top through that second bead, which for me is on the left. If you're right-handed, it should be on your right. Then you just pull your thread all the way through. And that will set that bead standing straight up and down on the frame like that. Now, I like to go ahead and straighten this first bead out So I'm going to come down through the very first bead towards myself. I'm working on the front side of my frame here. Then I'm just going to pass back up through from bottom to top through the second bead one more time. And that's going to set my bead so that they sit a little bit more side by side, like that. So now we're going to work one bead at a time. So you're going to pick up your next bead, let it drop down to your bead frame. And I always wrap my finger around, or my thread around my finger like that. Just helps me to keep this bead in place right here. Now I'm going to come back through the center of my frame again. Now I'm working on the front again, so now I'm going to pass up through from the bottom to the top through that bead I'm adding. I'll show you a couple more up close so you can see better. And I have a couple of other videos and a brick stitch around a bead frame guide on the beadmat.com website. So now I'm picking up another bead. So let it drop. I'm going to hold it close to the frame here like that. I'm going to take the needle and come in through the center of the frame. Pull my thread through. Hold my bead into position. And I'm going to come from the bottom to the top through that bead. Just like that. When I pull, you'll notice how I scooch that bead up against the previous beads before it. And so basically that's all we're going to do for this entire outside edge of this bead frame. So I'm just going to keep working along until I've come all the way around. And don't sew all the way up against your very first bead, because I want to talk to you about, how to space, how to get that last bead in without creating a bulge or a bead that pokes out. We want all of our beads to sit in a nice straight line across the outside edge of this bead frame like that. So let's do one more. Here's another technique I use for doing this stitch. I pick up a bead onto my needle. And I got my beadwork laying here up against my finger. So take the needle and poke under the bead frame like that. And use my finger to hold that little tiny seed bead right there into position. Pull it down beside the one previous to it. And then pass the needle back up through. That saves me the step of having to pull my thread all the way through and letting that bead slide all the way down each time. Let me show you again. Pick up the bead on my needle. I've got my beadwork laying here on my finger. I've got the bead right there, so I'm poking underneath the frame through the center, holding that bead with the edge of my finger like that. Take the needle and come back up. That gives a little less wear and tear on your arms from having to pull the thread so many times. So I'm just going to keep on working until I've come all the way around. So go ahead and pause while you get busy on your own. And when you get close to this where the first bead is added here, meet me back and I'll show you how to close this beadwork up. So I've stitched my way around. And I've added beads all the way around the outside edge of the frame. And here I am, and I've come back around, and here's my first bead. Right here. There's my last bead. Now, I apologize, my skin's a little dry today. I was working with metal all weekend, so just look over that. But, so now when you're doing brick stitch, a lot of it comes down to, especially in a circular fashion or around a frame, a lot of it's going to come down to you making a judgment call. So here's a good example of when you'll have to make a judgment call. Is there enough space for me to add one more bead onto my frame without causing one of them to pop forward or backwards and bulge out? So let's take a look at my frame. So as I've worked along, I have taken my fingers and I've just went like this And I have made sure that all my beads sit nice and straight in this line all the way around the edge of the frame. If my space here is too small and I try to add a bead in, what's going to happen is that bead is going to pop out to the front side or the back side of the work, and it's not going to look good. A lot of times, however, the only way you have of telling is to go ahead and try putting a bead in. But once you get used to doing this beadwork, you'll have a little bit more of an instinctual advantage. Like, for example, I know that right now if I try to put this bead in, when I close my beadwork up, I'm going to have a problem with one of my beads being pushed out. So to remedy that, I'm just going to go ahead and close my beadwork. And I can manipulate my beads just a little bit like so that they're closer together without creating a huge gap along the rest of my beads around here. So let me show you how to close the beadwork. So this is the last bead I've added, and I stitched back up like normal so that I'm exiting the top of that bead. What I'm going to do to close up my beadwork is I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come down through the very first bead on my frame. I'm going to pull my thread all the way through, and it'll pull those two beads close to each other, and it creates a thread bridge up above between that last bead and that first bead. So now I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go back up through the very last bead one more time. And I'm going to put a thread bridge at the bottom between those two beads. So now when I pull my work nice and snug, you can see that those beads sit nicely beside each other. And my beadwork is now closed because I've added those thread bridges between those two, the first and the last bead. And that is what you call closing the beadwork. And now that I've got all of that done, I'm going to end my tail thread. So I'm just going to take my scissors or a thread burner, and I'm just going to pull nice and tight as I cut that thread off. Because we tied a knot, we don't have to worry about that thread coming loose. So this is what we have so far. Now for our next step, we're going to work down into, I'm going to flip this over to the back so you can see a little bit better. What we're going to do is we're going to work down into the center of our bead frame, and we're going to stitch and form this section of beads around the inside edge of the bead frame, which is here. And to do that, we're going to be using our delicas and a few of our little 15-0s, and we're going to also be using our 6 crystals for each earring. So I'm coming out of the top of that last bead I added. I need to get into position, so I'm going to come down through the bead to the right or the left. It doesn't matter. Just come from the top through to the bottom of the next bead beside it on either side. And then pull. So now you can see here that I am into the inside edge of my work. My thread is laying here towards the front of my beadwork, towards me. And on the initial round, I added these 4 silver delica beads, then a crystal, then 4 delica beads, then a crystal, until I worked all the way around and came back to the first delica bead that I added on. But remember, we're starting a new row of brick stitch, so we'll need to pick up 2 delica beads. So now my thread is exiting from the bottom of that seed bead. And it's time to start our inside row. So once again, because we're starting a row, we're going to start by picking up 2 beads. And now we're going to be working with our delicas first. So pick up 2 of your 11-0 delicas. You're going to let those fall down to your bead frame, just like that. Now my thread is exiting right here. I'm going to move over to the second thread bridge. I'm going to poke my needle between those 2 15-0 beads underneath that outer thread bridge, just like that, so I can get to the back side of my beadwork. I'm going to pull my thread through. And I'm going to use my finger to hold these 2 delicas up into place, like that. So now I'm on the back side of my beadwork. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come up through that second delica that I added. And once again, because I'm left-handed, my second bead is on the left. So I'm going to push up through from the bottom to the top through that delica, and I'll pull my thread all the way through. And that's going to stand that bead up on the inside edge of the frame. So now I need to straighten my first bead. So I'm going to come down through the first bead from the top to the bottom. Pull my thread through again. And then I'm just going to pass right back up through that second bead from bottom to top. And I'm keeping my needle on the front side of my bead frame. So now I have those two delicas sitting in position. So now we're going to do this again. We're picking up a delica and we're letting it drop down to our bead frame. It's going to position right here. So I want to take my needle and I'm going to poke through underneath the thread bridge between the next two 15-0 seed beads right there. My needle will rub up against the bead frame if I'm in the right position. I'm going to hold that little delica up into a place where it goes. Now I'm on the back side, so I'm going to come up through that delica from the bottom to the top and poke my needle back to the front of my bead frame at the same time. Then I'm going to give it a nice little tug and scoot it up against the previous delica, just like that. All right, so now we're going to add one more. So pick up a delica. And I'm going to let it come all the way down to my bead frame. I'm going to see where that bead's going to sit. And I'm going to take my needle and poke it through the between the two 15-0s below where I want it to sit on the frame. And I apologize, but I've got really crappy lighting today. So I'm poking through between those two 15-0s from the front to the back. Now I'm going to position that delica up on my frame, just like that. Then I'm going to come from behind. I'm going to go from the bottom to the top through my delica and then also towards the front side of my frame. So now I have my 4 delicas added. So now we're going to add a crystal, and we're going to do it in the same way. We're going to pick up our crystal and let it drop. Now this bead is going to sit with the hole facing up when we finish the stitch. So what you'll want to do is get a good idea here where you want this thread bridge to land on the other side of your crystal. So basically you're going to skip over probably close to 3 sets of beads and then poke your needle through the two 15-0s like that. And go to the back side of your frame. Get your little crystal into position. Come from the back side of the frame, go from the bottom to the top through the crystal and out to the front side of your frame. And pull your crystal into position, just like that. Now, when we add our next few delicas, it will further straighten up our crystal so that it is sitting straight up and down. So we're just going to add 1 delica at a time now until we add 4 more delicas. So pick up 1, let it drop down. Get a good gauge of where it's going to be sitting on the frame, like so. And that is where you want to poke your needle through, directly under that spot on the bead frame between your two 15-0 beads. Like that. And when you pull it through, use your finger to position your delica. Come from the back side, go up through that delica from the bottom to the top, and once again, come out the front side of your beadwork from the center. And then when you wiggle it into position, it will scoot up against the crystal just like that. And now my crystal is sitting straight up and down quite a bit better. So I'm going to add 3 more of my delicas just in the same exact manner as I did that one. Picking up, let it come down. See where it's going to land on the bead frame. Go right below that and poke through the two 15-0s underneath that spot. Position the bead. Come from the back side now And then I'm going to go up through the bead from the bottom to the top. And then I'm going to come out the front side of my bead frame. Like that. And when I pull that bead into position, I'm going to wiggle it up against the previous bead before it, just like that. So we're just going to repeat that 4 delicas, a crystal, 4 delicas, a crystal, all the way around till the last bead we should add is going to be a crystal right here beside these first 4 delicas that we put on. So go ahead and pause while you add those beads on. Use rewind if you need to. And then meet me back here after you're, right before you add your last crystal, and we'll do that part together. As you work, you'll want to make sure that your beads do not bunch up too tightly against each other, and that they lay in this nice straight line, side by side, along each other on the bead frame. Now, it's very important as you're working along to make sure that when you add those beads on this round, that you do let them drop all the way down, and that you do get a good estimate of where you want that bead to fall and poke your needle through directly below it. If you don't, you're going to wind up with gaps or really tight beads, and you don't want that on this inside edge. You want everything to lay nicely like mine are. See how they're laying nice in a straight line? There's no bunching, and there's no big gaps between the beads. And that's what you really need for this round. So take your time and position that bead up before you poke through your 15 hole, between your 15 O's, so that when you pull that bead into position, it sits really nice beside the one before it without a big gap. Now you can manipulate it a little bit, but you really want to make sure that you're getting them in the right spot to begin with. So now I'm coming around and I'm getting ready to add my last crystal. So we'll go ahead and let it drop, put it on the needle and let it drop down. I'm going to position it to where I want it to sit, and I'm going to pass through the 2 15 O's below it, between the thread bridge on the outer edge and the bead frame. Then I'm going to come from the back side and go from the bottom to the top through that crystal, just like we've been doing. And I'm going to pull my little crystal into position here. So now I need to close this beadwork. I need to connect this crystal to the very first delica that we added in this round. So now, working from the front side of the beadwork, just take your needle and pass down through that first delica from the top to the bottom. Pull your thread all the way through. Then you're going to pass up through the crystal one more time from the bottom to the top and pull your thread all the way through. So now we've closed the beadwork and we've created a thread bridge between those beads. And now I'm going to just repeat that step one time just to make sure that everything's nice and secure. So I'm going to come back down through that very first delica again from the top to the bottom, pull my thread, and I'm going to come up through my crystal one more time from the bottom to the top, all while staying on the front side of my bead frame. Just like that. So I'm going to flip this one over again so I can show you what we're going to do in the next round. So in the next round, we're going to add these little 15-0 beads as accent beads over top of each one of our crystals. And I'm going to show you how to get started and how we're going to do that. So in order to get started, the first thing we're going to have to do is position ourselves. We're exiting from this crystal here, and we want to be exiting this delica, the fourth delica, going to the left for me. And if you're right-handed, it'll be going towards the right. So I've come down through that delica one more time to my left. I'm going to pass up through the delica beside of it. And keep my needle on the front side of my beadwork here for each stitch. Then we'll come down through the third delica. And then up through that fourth delica right beside my next crystal. And still keep my needle up to the front side of my bead frame. Just like that. So now we're into position, and we can start adding these little scallops of 15-0 seed beads that you see way down in here. So we're starting a new row. So that means that we're going to pick up 2 of our 15-0s, because we always start each row with 2. So we're on the front side of the beadwork. We're going to take our needle, and if it's easier for you to work from the back, you can just go ahead and poke your needle straight to the back side of the beadwork like that. And I think that's going to be the easiest way. So I'm going to go ahead and be on the back side of my beadwork, and I've picked up my 2 15-0s. I'm going to come under this little side thread bridge here on the side of my crystal. I'm going to hold my fingers like that so I can catch a hold of my 2 little seed beads right there. Then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come up through the second bead I picked up, which is the one to the left for me. It'll be on the right if you're right-handed. And now I'm going to straighten up that first 15-0 by just passing my needle down from the top to the bottom through that 15-0. Pull. And come back up through that second one from the bottom to the top again. And when I go through that one, I'm going to poke back through to the back side of my bead frame again. So now I have my first 2 little beads in place, and I'm going to be doing a total of 5 on each scallop. So I'm going to pick up another one, and I'm going to come back under that same thread bridge here on the right side of my crystal. And I'm going to hold my bead as I pull my thread. Then I'm going to pass my, now I'm on the front here, so I'm going to pass my needle from the bottom to the top and back to the back side of my bead frame. Just like that. So now I've got to add 2 more, one at a time. I'm going to pick up one of my 15-0s, and now I'm going to jump over to this thread bridge on the left side of that crystal, and I'm going to pass my needle under that. And I'm still using my fingers to catch my little bead and hold it into position. So now I'm going to go from the bottom to the top through that 15-0 and back to the back side of the frame and pull. And now that little bead is standing beside the other ones, but I'm closer to this delicate on the left side. So I got one more to add. I'm going to pick it up, and I'm going to go under that left thread bridge again on the left side of my crystal. Pull my bead into position, pass back through that bead, and then also to the back side of my bead frame, so that I'm coming out of the top of that 5th bead. So now I have that little scallop of 15-0s across the top of my crystal, just like that. So now I need to get over to this next crystal, but I've got a big gap here, so I don't want to leave a huge gap in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up 1 11-0 delica onto my needle. And then I'm going to go through underneath. I'm back here on the back side of my frame again. I'm going to go under the thread bridge that's between beads 3 and 4 of those 4 delicas we added on the first row. So I want you to find the thread bridge that's between bead 2 and 3, right there, directly in the middle of those 4. And as you pull your thread through, hold on to your little seed bead so it positions itself right here. Then pass from the bottom to the top and go back to the back side of your bead frame, just like that. That's going to stand that little delica up right in the center between in the middle of those 4 first delicas that we put on in row 1 of the inside. So now I can start my next scallop. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up one of my 15-0 seed beads. And I'm going to go under that thread bridge right there on the right-hand side of that next crystal. And I'm going to use my finger once again to keep that bead in position. Then I'm going to go from the bottom to the top through that 15-0 I'm adding. And I'm going to poke back through to the back side of my bead frame again. And when I pull that bead into position, it's going to sit right there up against the crystal. And as I add the second bead, it will stabilize that bead and make it look more straight into the line. So pick up a bead and go under that same thread bridge on the right-hand side or left-hand side of your crystal, whichever side you're working on. Come back up through that bead you just added and poke back through in the middle of the frame to the back side. And so now when I position that bead, you'll see how those two beads are sitting nicely beside each other. So I'm going to add 3 more beads. I'm going to add 1 more on the thread bridge here. Actually, now I'm going to skip over because I've run out of room. I'm just going to skip over to the left-hand side here. Hold that bead with my finger into position. And then I need to make sure it's not twisted. Because when I pass back through it, I want to be going through the bottom to the top of that seed bead I'm just now adding. So now I've crossed over, and I'm going to add my last 2 15-ohs here on the left-hand side. And I've got 1 more to do on this scallop. So I'm picking up my last seed bead, coming under the thread bridge here on the left of the crystal, pulling it into position, passing back through, and also through my bead frame. So now I have my little scallop beads here on the outside edge of this crystal. And it looks to me like I didn't get this one here correct. You can see I must have let that bead twist, so it's sitting sideways instead of standing up and down. This bead right here. So I'm going to take my thread off of my needle, and I'm going to pull that beadwork out. I'm going to pull out those 2 beads. And the reason that I'm taking my needle off is because basically, if I try to do it with my needle, I could get my needle hung up in there, and I don't want to really cause a super big mess. So now I've pulled those out, and I'm going to straighten up my 3 beads right there, and they look pretty good. So I have to rethread my needle here. And my needle has gotten really bent, so let me straighten it. And I straightened my needle several times during this project. Just so you realize that if you're bending your needle a lot, you can stop and straighten it. God damn it. So I rethreaded my needle, and I went ahead and added those last 2 beads of my scallop. So let me show you this delica one more time. So I added that last 15-0, and I'm exiting from the top of it, and I'm on the back side of my beadwork again. I'm picking up my 11-0 delica, and I'm going to go under the thread bridge between the 2nd and 3rd delica from the previous row. So right in here, I'm going under that thread bridge between the 2nd and 3rd delica on the previous row. Then I'm to the front again of my beadwork here. So when I come through that bead from the bottom to the top, I'm going to pass back through to the back side of the beadwork, just like we've been doing. So now I have that little delica standing there. And I'm ready to keep on doing my scallops. So I'm going to go ahead and complete my last 4 scallops. And when I get done with the scallops on this last crystal, I'll come back and we'll add this last delica together and close up the beadwork one more time. So I've come all the way around, and I've added my last set of little 15-0 scallops here. And I've got my needle on the wrong side here. Let me go back to the back side. So I've picked up my little delica. It's on my needle right here. And I'm going to poke my needle under the thread bridge between that 2nd and 3rd delica from the previous row. And I'm going to come up from the bottom to the top through that delica, and I'm going to push back through to the back side of my beadwork one more time. And then when I pull, my little delica is standing straight up, and my thread is exiting from the top of it. So now we need to close a thread bridge between this delica and that first 15-0. So I'm going to come back around to the front side of my beadwork to do this particular step. I'm exiting the top of this delica. I'm going to come through from top to bottom through that very first 15-0 C bead right there that I added in this round. And now that I'm exiting the bottom of that bead, I'm going to come up from the bottom through the top of the last delica bead I just added. And I'm going to put a thread bridge between those two beads. Okay, so let's continue on. My camera, actually, my battery died, and I thought I had it plugged in, but I must have not had it completely plugged in. So now to do the next step, I'm going to go back to the back side of my bead frame by poking right straight through the center of it. And now we're going to add this last little row of scallops in the very inside edge here of all silver delicas. So we should be exiting from that last delica bead right there that we added between our two scallops. And we're going to pick up 2 of our delicas. And we're going to notice here that at the top of these 15-0 C beads, you have a thread bridge. We have a thread bridge right here between the delica and the first 15-0, and then there's a thread bridge between each of those 15-0s. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip that first thread bridge here that's between the delica and the 15-0, and I'm going to come through the next thread bridge, which sits between the first and second 15-0 on my very first scallop. So right there is where I want to poke my needle under. It sits between beads 1 and 2 of that scallop right there. And I'm going to pull that through. And I've got 2 delicas sitting like this. So now I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go through my second delica, which to me is on the left again, and go to the back side of my beadwork. I'm going from bottom to top through that delica and standing it straight up. So now I'm going to straighten up this bead right there. So I'm going to come down from top to bottom through the first delica, back to the front side of my beadwork here. Then I'm just going to go right back through that second delica again from the bottom to the top, and then also go to the back side of my beadwork. So just like that. And come out the back again. So now I've got those 2 beads straightened up and they're sitting side by side. So I'm going to be adding 3 more delicas for a total of 5. So now I'm on the back side again, and I've got my delica here on my needle. So now I'm going to come under that very next thread bridge there on my 15-0s. I'm going to come through to the front. I'm going to pass back through my bead from bottom to top, back to the back side. So there's 3. So now I have 2 more to do, and I was accidentally on the wrong side again. So I've picked up my next delica, and I'm going to come under the next thread bridge on my 15-0s. I'm going to pass back up through that delica and go back to the back side of my beadwork. So now I need to pick up another delica, and I'm going to come through the next thread bridge, pass back up through that delica to the back side of my beadwork one more time. A delica again, but this time when we pick up our delica, we're still on the back side of our beadwork. We're going to come through the thread bridge that is between the 15-0 and that middle delica that we added between our blue scallops, or our hematite scallops. We're going to come through to the front side, just like we've been doing. We're going to go back up through that delica from the bottom to the top and go to the back side of the beadwork. We're going to pull that bead into position just like that. So now we're going to pick up another delica, and we're going to come between the thread bridge on this side of our delica on the other, excuse me, let me get some better light here. So we're picking up this delica. We're going to go under the thread bridge between the delica on the previous row and the 15-0 C bead on our next scallop to the left if you're left-handed, to the right if you're right-handed. And we're going to get that little C bead, that little delica positioned right here. We're going to come through it from the bottom to the top and go back to the back side of our beadwork. So now we're going to add 4 more of our delicas. We're going to pick up a delica. We're going to come under the thread bridge. I'm going to skip over one thread bridge and come through the next thread bridge on my 15-0s. I'm going to pass right back through that delica and go back to the back side of my beadwork. I'm going to pick up another 15-0, and then I'm going to come through the next thread bridge right there. Excuse me, I'm picking up another delica, coming through the thread bridge of the 15-0. Pass back through the delica, bottom to top, and go back behind the beadwork. So now I have 1, 2, 3. I need 2 more. I'm picking up a delica. I'm coming through this last thread bridge here between beads 4 and 5 of those little hematite 15-0s. I'm going to pass back through that delica and go back to the back side of my beadwork from the bottom to the top. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 delicas over this scallop. So when I pick up my 5th delica, this is where I'm going to come under the thread bridge between that 15-0 and that delica there on the previous row. I'm going to pass back up through that delica and cross back under my bead frame to the back. I'm going to pick up my next delica. I'm going to come under the thread bridge between the 15-0 and the delica to the left here where I'm working, right there. I'm going to pull that bead into position. I'm going to come back through that bead from bottom to top and then cross back through the inside of my bead frame. So now I have 5 beads on this scallop, 1 bead on this scallop, 5 beads on this scallop, and this little extra bead just kind of hanging around out here. Alright, so now I'm going to pick up my next delica. I'm going to skip the very next thread bridge and I'm going to come through the second one. Right there. I'm going to go back through that delica from bottom to top and go to the back of the bead frame. Pick up my delica, come under the next thread bridge, go back through my delica, back to the back side. So now I have 3 beads on this scallop here. So I'm going to pick up another delica, come through that last thread bridge here between the 4th and 5th 15-0 on that scallop right there. Pass back through it and go back to the back side. So now I have 4 delicas on this scallop. So now I know that I need to come back and go under this thread bridge between the 15-0 and the delica right there. So I picked up my delica and I'm going through. I'm going to come back through that delica from the bottom to the top and go to the back. So now I have 5 scallops over this crystal, silver scallops. And you can see how those are shaping up really nicely. So now I need to jump over to the thread bridge that is between that delica from the previous row and then the next 15-0 here on this next crystal. So right there. Pull my bead up into position, then pass back through it just like that. and go to the back. Pick up a bead, skip one thread bridge, and come through the next one. Right there. And then go back through and go to the back. Adding my third delica, coming through the next thread bridge. Pass back through my delica and go back to the back of the bead frame. Pick up the fourth delica, come under that last thread bridge between the fourth and fifth 15-0 on the scallop from the previous row. Pass up through that same delica we're adding and go back to the back. So it's time to add the fifth one for this scallop. So I'm picking up my delica and I'm going to come through that thread bridge there between the last 15-0 and the delica sitting between those scallops on the previous row. Come back through just that delica that I'm adding from the bottom to the top and go back to the back side of my frame again. So now we've completed that scallop. We're going to jump the gap. We're going to pick up a bead. We're going to come in between the thread bridge there between that delica on the previous row and the 15-0 on the next crystal scallop. Bring our bead into place. Pass through from bottom to top and also go through to the back side of the bead frame. Pick up one of our delicas. Skip one thread bridge and come through the next thread bridge right there between hematite 15-0s. Pass back up and go through to the back. Getting our third one here. Third delica coming through the very next thread bridge. Going back up through that third delica and to the back of the frame. Alright, so this is the fourth one, so we're going to come through pick up a bead, go under the thread bridge between the fourth and the fifth 15-0 underneath. Go back through that delica from bottom to top and then to the back of the frame. So we're almost back around. And I bet you guys are glad. So now we're going to add this fifth delica, pick it up, go through that thread bridge there between the 15-0 and the delica on the previous row, right there. Position your bead, then pass back through it from the bottom to the top and go to the back of the frame. Pick up another bead. Come to the left side if you're left-handed or the right side if you're right-handed. Let me find my place here. Of the delica on the previous row and that 15-0 on your next scallop right there. Position your bead. Pass back up through that bead and go to the back of the frame. So now there's the first bead on this scallop. And we have the last bead on that scallop sitting over here. So that means we only need to add 3 beads. So we're going to pick up a bead. We're going to skip over one of our thread bridges just like we've been doing. Pass under the next one. Come back up through our delica and go to the back of the frame. So now I've got to connect these 2 beads here. So I'm coming out of the top of that last bead I just added. And I need to go down into the top of this very first bead right here. Just that one bead. And I'm on the back side, so you can see that I've come through it from the back side. And I'm going to wiggle these beads till they kind of pull closer together. Now I'm going to come back up through the very last bead I added right there on the front side, because I'm on my front side, and I'm going to pull. Now I've got those two beads sitting side by side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinforce that stitch, and we'll come back down through that very first one again, right here. Now I'm going to pull it nice and tight. Then we'll come up through the very last one more time from the bottom to the top. And get my light to cooperate with me here. Right there. And when I pull, I'm going to pull really nice and secure. And now I've created a little bit of a gap right here, so I'm going to close that up just by, I'm exiting the top of this bead. I'm going to come down through from top to bottom of that bead where I've made a little bit of a gap. We'll pull. I'm going to go back up through that last bead again. And I'm going to secure those beads a little bit closer together. So in essence, I've closed up that gap. So now we've got all of our inner beadwork done. There's the back side. And there's the front side. So now what we have left to do is add this little circle of accent beads around the center of our work. We're going to actually be laying it across the top of this bead frame and covering up some of that exposed thread right there. And then we just simply need to sew back out to the outer edge and add our little horseshoe wire protector. So let's get into position. We're exiting the top of that very last bead we added. I want you to come down one bead to the right so that you're close to your crystal. And when you go through that bead, I want you to also pass through the 15-0 bead that's underneath it. So if it takes you a little poking around, I want you to get through both of those beads. So there I am coming through my silver bead and my hematite bead. You want to pull nice and snug. Then I'm going to come right down through the center of my crystal right there. So now I've got myself positioned right here beside my bead frame. Now all I'm going to do is take my needle and I'm going to poke up under one of those thread bridges right there on the bead frame. Pull it through. Just like that. So now I'm in position to add these little circle of accent beads here around the edge. So now we're going to add some accent beads. And we've dug under that thread right underneath the center hole of that crystal. So that's where we should be positioned. And I'm working back towards the right. So I've picked up 3 delicas, 2 15-0s, and 3 delicas. Let's let those slide off my needle. I'm going to take and I'm going to skip over all these thread bridges. And I'm going to come through the corresponding thread bridge here underneath my very next crystal, right there. Now pull those beads and set them just like that along the edge. I'm going to repeat that all the way around my beadwork. So I'm going to pick up 3 delicas, 2 15-0s, and 3 more delicas. I'm going to let them slide off my needle. I'm underneath this crystal, so I'm going to pass through the thread bridge under my next crystal right here. And you'll see that there's a little gap here, and that's okay. We're going to come through and fill that in next. So go ahead and repeat that until you've come around and went under the thread bridge under each crystal. So I've got 3 more delicas, 2 more 15-0s, and 3 more delicas. I'll come over and go under the thread bridge underneath my next crystal. So now I'm coming out under this crystal, so I have to do 1, 2, 3 more. So I'm going to do 2, and I'll meet you back here on the last one. So here I am, and I've got my last set of beads, which is 3 delicas, 2 50-no's, and 3 delicas on my needle. And I'm going to come right back under that very same thread bridge that I started from. And pull those beads right there. Now I'm going to jump right straight up and step up into those first 6 beads I added. So I'm going to pass through the 3 delicas, 2 50-no's, and 3 delicas. I want to be exiting from that last delica right there. Now I'm going to pick up 2 50-no's. And I'm going to go into the next 6 beads. Right there. Make sure you don't skip any. And pull those 2 little delicas so they sit in that little space in between right there. I mean those 2 little 50-no's. Pick up 2 more 50-no's. And go through your next 6 beads. Or excuse me, 8 beads. Your 3 delicas, 2 50-no's, 3 delicas. We're just going to repeat that all the way around. Adding 2 50-no's in between those sets of beads we added in the previous round. And I'm not pulling those super duper tight, but I'm just making sure my thread is all the way through and they're nice and secure. And I'm making sure that I don't skip any beads along the way. So now I'm picking up my last 2, and I'm going to come back through those first 8 beads right there where I started this round from. And now I have 2 little 15-no's sitting in between all those beads. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to reinforce this entire circle of beads. So I'm going to go through the 2 seed beads I added at the first of this round, and then all 8 of those beads in the next 2 seed beads. And pull. I'm going to go through those next 8 seed beads and the 2 little 15-no's I added between them. And I'm going to keep doing this until I've come all the way back around to this crystal right here. And I'm going to be exiting from those 2 seed beads right there at the bottom of that crystal, and that way I know I've been all the way around. And I've reinforced this entire circle of beads. So I'm just going to keep moving until I get there. The trick here is to make sure that you don't skip any beads. If you skip one, at any point you'll have exposed thread showing right here on the beautiful front side of your bead, of your earring. So there I am coming all the way around, and I'm exiting from those last 2 seed beads that I added at the beginning of that previous round. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go underneath that thread bridge, right under that, and I'm also going to go under that little row of beads that we just added to our front side of our earring. So I'm exiting to the inside right there. I'm going to come back up through my crystal from the bottom towards the center, just like that. And I'm going to keep my thread on the front side of my beadwork. So now I'm going to go up through a 15-0 and an 11-0 sitting here above my crystal that's part of my scallop. You might have a little trouble getting in that 15-0, but just keep poking around till you get in there. So now I went through that 15-0 and that 11 delica right there. And I'm going to go ahead and poke through to the back. Whoops, I've just pulled mine right out. Let's try it again. So get back into those beads. And I'm going to work to the back side now. So I'm going to go all the way through and come around to the back. Just like that. That way I could see better what I'm doing. So now I'm going to stitch down the next delica. Doesn't matter whether you go to the right or left. Then up the next delica. And now I'm going to stitch down through that delica there that I added on my scallop. And I'm also going to go through that delica between my scallops there closest to the bead frame. So now I'm on the back side of my beadwork and I'm exiting a delica right here on the edge of my frame. And I'm just going to go up into one of my 15-ohs on the outside. Just like that. And so now I want to add my little horseshoe protector. And I want to make sure that I add it into the same area that I added it on this earring. So I want to position my horseshoe protector so that it centers over these delicas right here in between those two crystals, just like that. So I'm exiting actually out of a good bead. There's my those 4 delicas inside right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 1 and 2. So I'm coming out of that seed bead almost directly above that second delica, closest to my frame. I'm going to take my needle. I'm going to pass up through one side of my horseshoe protector, just like that. I'm going to let that come all the way down to my beadwork. I'm going to come down through the other side of that horseshoe protector and make sure that my thread falls into that little gap here on top of the horseshoe protector. I'm exiting from this seed bead. I'm going to skip over one and I'm going to come down through the 3rd seed bead. This is the one I'm exiting. I'm skipping this one and coming down through this one. So now when I pull, my little protector sits right there, just like that, centered over these 4 delicas along the base row. So now I have to come back, get into position to come back up through this protector. So I'm going to skip this 2nd seed bead, and I'm going to go up through that 3rd seed bead. I'm going to pull nice and tight so that thread sucks in as closely as it can to that row of beads. I'm going to come down through the seed bead right beside of it. But I don't want to go under that thread, so just be really careful. You just want to get under that seed bead and not that little thread. And now I can pass back up through the seed bead that is here directly under my horseshoe protector. When I pass up it, I'm going to go right through my horseshoe protector at the same time. I'm going to come around my horseshoe protector and come down through the hole on the left. And I'm going to go through that seed bead directly underneath it at the same time. Right there. When I pull this thread, I'm going to pull nice and slow and make sure it falls into that little gap at the top of my protector, just like that. And so now I've got 2 passes through this little wire guardian. So that's, since it's an earring, it's not going to get a great amount of wear and tear, and that should be enough to hold it. So now I'm going to stitch my way around this outside edge of my beadwork. So I'm coming out of the bottom of that 11 C or 15 C bead, and go up through the next one, down through the next one, and I'm just going to keep weaving up and down like that to secure my thread. And after I've gone through, you know, a couple of beads, when I come down through this next bead, I'm also going to skip straight down and go back into one of my crystals down here. So I'm coming through the crystal. And I've pulled through to the front side of my beadwork. just because that's where the angle led me. So now I need to go through one of my hematite beads above my crystal here, whichever one I can get into, and the Delica bead above it as well. So I'm going to try to get into that 15-0 in one of my Delicas, just like that. Pull it through and flip it back around. And now I'm just going to weave through a couple of these Delicas. I was coming out of the top of this Delica right here. I'm going to go from top to bottom through the next one. And I'm staying on the back side of my beadwork. I'm going to go up through the next one. Then I'm going to go down through the next one. And then I'm going to go down through that one little Delica that we added between our hematite scallops. Just like that. And now my thread is nice and secure. My wire protector is nice and secure. So I can just go ahead and end this thread. I'm going to take my fingers and shape up my little circle of beads that I added as an accent here, so that they form a nice little circle, and so that my two earrings look similar. Now we can add our ear wire. I'm going to slide that little spring and ball out of the way. I'm going to take my pliers and I'm going to trim the opening to the side, like that, of my ear wire. I'm going to take the front of my earring and put it down this way onto my ear wire so that the back is showing now. And then I'm going to take my pliers and move that little hoop over to the side to close up my little hoop, just like that. I'm going to put the ball back down. And I want to put the spring back down. And give my beads just a nice little nudge so that my little circle stays nicely formed. And there we have it. Two beautiful little earrings in hematite and silver. And there's the back. So I hope you like this class. I want to thank you for watching.